All right, well, hi everyone, I'm Liz O'Donnell, and as Sue said, I do have a house in Falmouth, and I've been coming here. My family's been coming since maybe the 40s or 50s, and I have a million cousins, more than 8, and so we've all had lots of great memories here. And a lot of my caregiving story takes place here because my parents retired to Falmouth. So I normally don't do this, but I want to read a little story from the book today. Normally I just speak, but the story takes place in Falmouth, and maybe some of you can relate to parts of it. So bear with me while I just share a little from the book, and then we'll get into the chat. But here we go. The problem is nobody dies anymore. My oldest sister looked at me, horrified by what I said, and then she started to giggle. You're awful. It's true. We were walking around the lake near my parents' house, the same lake we swam in as kids. It was a familiar walk, but we were in unfamiliar territory. Our father had started acting strange. He was confused by simple things. He didn't recognize his granddaughter and had lost all patience with our mother. Our mother was distraught. Several years earlier, she had tripped on her Crocs in the fall, which resulted in a broken nose, stitches, and bruising so bad that she looked like a pansy, her favorite flower, had changed her. She stopped driving, started using a walker, and became housebound except for the errands, doctor's appointments, and occasional lunches out that the home health aide, a neighbor, or I took her to. My sisters and I saw her growing older and sadder, but we felt helpless to do anything. We wanted our parents to move to an assisted living facility, and my mother wanted that too, but my father wouldn't go. We tried to convince her to go without him. We thought they might be happier living in separate places, but she wouldn't leave him, and we didn't know how we'd afford 2 homes anyway. Now with my father clearly not well, my mother appeared to be at her breaking point, and my sisters and I just didn't know what to do. Most people think about the fact that their parents will die someday. They prepare themselves as well as anyone can prepare for something you don't really know anything about. But what they don't consider and don't prepare for is that their parents might not die, at least not quickly or well. They might grow old and sick and stay that way for years. They may become frail or infirm. And children are never prepared for what feels like a role reversal when they start to care for their parents. They're not prepared for all the times that their parents resist their support, shun their help, ignore their advice, and they're forced to stand helplessly by and watch the people who raised and cared for them decline. I wasn't ready for any of that. Like the time my father decided to start driving again after years of riding in the passenger seat. He was in his mid-80s at the time, and he was frustrated that he couldn't take himself to the Falmouth Library. My brother is taking me to the RMV to renew my license, he told me. I hope you fail the test, I said. I couldn't stop him from going, so I could only hope that the trip would be fruitless. He'll drive whether he passes or not, my sisters warned me. They wanted me to take away his keys or remove the spark plugs. Side note, we used to love the sound of music, so I think that's where they got the idea to steal the spark plugs from. But I didn't. Despite pressure from the 2 of them and many teary phone calls from my mom begging me to stop, I didn't. He passed the test and drove himself to visit my mother, who was in the JML rehab up by Falmouth Hospital, recovering from a broken wrist. I was visiting her that day too, and he and I left together. I got in my car and I watched him walking around the parking lot. I rolled down the window. What's up? I can't remember where I parked, he said. Seems to me, if you can't find your car, you shouldn't be driving it. Bullshit, he said. I've been driving for over 60 years. There's no one more qualified on the road. God help us, I thought. Nor was I prepared for what happened the night one of my cousins threw me a party for my first book. I'd just gotten out of the shower when my cell phone rang. It was my aunt, who also lived in Falmouth. It's the same town as my parents. She said, I don't want you to worry, but your mother called us. Your father hasn't come home from his walk, and he pushed his lifeline. The lifeline, a pendant that both of my parents wore around their necks in case of emergency, automatically called for help in the event that someone pushed the panic button. It was dark out, and my parents' neighborhood was isolated. Do you have a cell phone number? My aunt asked me. I do, but I bet you the phone will ring on the counter behind you. It did. My parents never turned it on and never carried it. Part of me wasn't worried. My father frequently wandered off, not in an Alzheimer's kind of way, but to visit neighbors and talk for hours. But part of me started to panic. I pictured him lying in or beside the lake. 50 people were expecting me as the guest of honor at a party, but my father was missing. It'd probably take me about 2 hours to get my parents' house at that time on a Friday night, and my father could be found by then. So what was I supposed to do? I decided I'd dress for the party, but pack a bag for the Cape. I'd start driving towards my cousin's house. It was in the same general direction, and I'd make a decision as I drove. I tried applying eye makeup, but I had started to cry by then, and my tears kept smudging it. Just as I was about to head out the door, my mother called. The jerk is alive, she sobbed. Sure enough, he had stopped to visit a neighbor and decided to demonstrate how a lifeline worked. And I certainly wasn't prepared to become a criminal as a part of my caregiving responsibility. But shortly after my father got back behind the wheel, he informed me he'd climbed a ladder to clean the gutters. "Dad, you could fall and die," I said. "I'll take my chances," was his response. "Look, I'm fine with that. If you want to be a stubborn jackass and die, that's your business. But if you fall and you get hurt and you don't die, it'll be my business, and I don't have time to take care of you." But he wouldn't listen. So the weekend after our phone call, I took my kids down to Falmouth to see him. I set my alarm for very early Sunday morning, snuck out of the house, carried the ladder up the street, and stashed it in the bushes behind my cousin's house. When my father discovered it was missing, he assumed that one of the handymen that my mother occasionally hired stole it. The ladder is still in the bushes, a few hundred feet from the house, but my parents no longer live there, and I wasn't prepared at all for how that would happen. So that is the phase of my caregiving that I refer to as the caregiver's creep. I live in Dedham. My parents were in Falmouth. It's only an hour and 5 minutes door to door, but that becomes a very long hour and 5 minutes when you need to be here as opposed to when you want to be here. But I'll tell you how it all did happen after that. And what happened was on June 14th, several years ago, I got a phone call from my sister who lives out of state. And in Dedham, I don't think it's the same in Falmouth, but in Dedham, June 14th is a big deal, bigger than Flag Day. I mean, bigger than 4th of July, it's Flag Day. And Dedham has the second longest running Flag Day parade in the country. And when it falls on a Saturday, like it did that year, it's like Christmas, your birthday, and 4th of July all rolled into one. And I was so excited for that day. I'd been traveling for work for about 3 weeks off and on. And I was finally home. Both of my kids had soccer games, last game of the season, home games, which meant a beautiful sunny day, which meant I just had to sit in a lawn chair, gab with my other mom friends while my husband coached and my kids played. And then after the games, we didn't just go to the parade, we were in the parade. My kids and I used to march with the farmer's market float for years, which meant I would don a full head-to-toe carrot suit and march through the town because why be a mother if you can't embarrass your children, right? And then we were going to have a cookout with friends, and I was just really looking forward to that day. But during one of the games, my sister called, and she said, "I just hung up the phone with Mom. Dad's acting really strange. She's afraid to be alone with him. Can you go?" I didn't want to go. I just didn't want to go. I was sick of running down here, driving over the bridge, and figuring out what was wrong. But I decided I'd march in the parade, and then I would go. And if you saw me that night, I didn't have my carrot suit on. I wasn't feeling it after that phone call. I had big dark sunglasses on, and I would have waved and smiled, but behind those glasses, the tears were starting to well up because I just knew something about this phone call was different. So I came here, and sure enough, my dad was just not himself. Rookie mistake, I took him to the emergency room to be evaluated. I wouldn't recommend. And overnight, he tried to leave, and he was given a very powerful antipsychotic drug. So when I came back the next day, he was speaking gibberish. He was strapped to a gurney. He couldn't seem to walk, didn't know who I was, and I thought I had killed him. I thought I had wrecked my father. So they said they were going to transfer him to a geriatric psych hospital over the bridge. So in the meantime, my mother, who you heard had that bad fall and was frail, I couldn't leave her alone, and yet I had to get back to my family and my job. So I drove to all of the assisted livings in Falmouth, and I ended up signing a short-term lease at the Atria. And I said to my mother, "Please just go stay there for 30 days. I need to go home and figure out what's going on." And I literally sort of just dumped this poor woman, but in this assisted living with no warning. And then I put out the word to all the relatives that guests eat free, so I knew that she'd have lots of company while I was gone. Fast forward to July 1st of that year. Now my father's been in the hospital for a couple of weeks. The team wants to meet with me. So I go to the hospital, and they tell me it's Alzheimer's and that he needs to live in a memory care facility, and that I have 4 days or something to find one, and if not, they'll discharge him to one of their choice. I leave that meeting, and of course I'm reeling, devastated by the news. And before I could even leave the hospital parking lot, my phone rang. So if you back up a couple days earlier, my mom had been sent out of the Atria in an ambulance with stomach pain to Falmouth. Falmouth transferred her to the Brigham in Boston. So now I'm at a different hospital. The Brigham's calling. And they said, "Liz, it's ovarian cancer, stage 4. How quickly can you get here? We think you should be the one to tell her." So 2 terminal diagnoses in one day. So the next 6 months of my life, as you could imagine, were completely and utterly wild. I just can't think of a better word to describe them. As I sorted through pills and bills and wills and tried to sort through these medical diagnoses. I think I moved my parents probably 4 different times. My mom from the Atria to assisted living to hospice. My dad from memory care to assisted living. That's a different story. That's 4 phone calls to Verizon, to hook up. And that alone, I think, could kill a person. Those holds, the bureaucracy, just that alone. And my parents were Depression-era babies, which meant they saved everything. So in between moving them and figuring all of this out, I was driving back and forth from Dedham to Falmouth and sorting through these massive Rubbermaid bins because we had never gone over their finances or if they had wills and trying to find paperwork. I had no sense of what kind of money they had, what kind of leases I could sign, and so I'm sorting through all of this. And everything that I described there, that's just the tactical part of caregiving. We referenced the emotional part of caregiving before this. So there's the emotional piece as well, the diagnoses, the explaining to the grandkids what are going on. And through all of that, I had to go to work because I was actually the breadwinner and my husband was a stay-at-home parent. So if I could have quit my job, I would have run screaming at that point. Even, having 2 children and being a working mother, I had my bad days, but I never thought I couldn't do it. But as a working daughter, I didn't think I could keep my job, but I really didn't have a choice. And I remember this one day, I worked remotely well before COVID. My company was in California, so I was on a phone call for our leadership team meeting. And my coworkers were talking about strategic paradigm shifts and circling back and all kinds of corporate buzzwords. And the doorbell rang, and it was a courier with my mother's comfort kit. And so anyone who's been a cancer caregiver knows the comfort kit contains the Ativan and the morphine and the drugs that I would use to help my mother have a good death. And so my coworkers are talking about all kinds of stupid stuff that all of a sudden I no longer cared about, and I was dealing with true life or death. But I had to earn. I thought for sure I'd lose my job, my marriage, and my sanity as I went through this experience. But I didn't. I mean, it's questionable, the sanity part, but I didn't technically. And so I vowed at that time that I would write a book and I would make sure that there was a resource so that no one else ever felt as alone and as unprepared as I did when all of this happened. And so I want to share with you what I learned. And I want to start with just some contextual information about caregiving, because each of us, I think, does go through this feeling so isolated and like we're the only one, but we are not alone. There are about 50,000 family caregivers in the United States. And the average family caregiver is a woman in her late 40s, early 50s, with at least 1 child under the age of 18 and 1 parent over the age of 65. So that sandwich generation, or panini, the press sandwich as I like to describe it. And she typically works outside the home, and she is struggling. About 60% of those women either change jobs, go part-time, take a temporary leave, or quit work altogether at a very high expense, to their own, not just their salaries, but then their retirement funds, et cetera, et cetera. 65% of all family caregivers are women. Now, I thought I was alone. I was actually the poster child at the time, and I looked like the poster child. So that whole summer, it was wet ponytails, no makeup, yoga pants and t-shirts, right? Because I literally would wake up in the morning and have no time to get dressed. And if I had a work meeting, then a little mascara and a real pair of pants, and I'd take the end of the wet ponytail and tuck it up and hope it looked like a fancy, chic bun. It didn't. And one day, I couldn't avoid it. I had to go to New York City on the Acela, the high-speed train, for a meeting. And as I'm brushing my teeth, which, hey, at least I had time to do that, right before I got on the train, my front tooth chipped in half and fell off. I'd been grinding my teeth from stress, and I didn't realize it. And I had to do the meeting like this. And even though that summer I was talking to nurses or doctors every day, I went to work like this and hoped no one really noticed. I think they did, because I just didn't have time to get to the dentist, to take care of my own health at that point. So I was the poster child for that average family caregiver, and 65% of them are women, but that means 35% are men, and that's not an insignificant amount. So this is not just a woman's issue. It's the majority women, but more and more men are going to be caregiving. 35% of family caregivers are millennials or younger. So it's not just the middle-aged woman that's, experiencing this. And in our Facebook community that Working Daughter has, every week somebody comes in their 20s and says, am I the only one here? And a bunch of voices come in and say, nope, you're not alone. More and more people are getting to caregiving younger and younger. It's a societal issue because 10,000 people are turning 65 every single day, and that's why we're feeling it right now. And there's a shortage of paid caregivers. There's waiting lists at nursing homes, and so it's falling to the family member. And it's an economic issue. So of those 50 million family caregivers, if you add up the value of the hours they spend, it's $600 billion of work, of unpaid work that family caregivers are doing. Billion dollars. So imagine the impact on the GDP if we had a better way to approach caregiving. So that doesn't necessarily help you in the day-to-day, but it puts some context into the fact that you are truly not alone as you go through this. But here's the best thing that I learned about caregiving. I learned about something called the caregiver's gain. And there are two professors. One is at Johns Hopkins and one is at University of South Florida. And they have been researching the impact of caregiving on people for years and years. The stress, the burden, the health, the high blood pressure, the weight gain, all of the things that we may have experienced and know to be true. And their most recent research, though, shows that yes, those things happen, but post-caregiving, there's something they've called the gain. And they found that caregivers compared to non-caregivers have greater cognitive functioning, enhanced self-esteem, greater physical strength, stronger connections, and even live longer lives. So what doesn't kill you actually really does make you stronger when it comes to caregiving. And I think if more of us knew that as we went through caregiving, like I think you said earlier, no regrets. I think if we knew, as hard as this is, and none of their research negates how difficult it is, but we knew that there actually is an upside, and a lot of that upside they liken to the fact that at our core as human beings, what we all want as a human is a true connection with someone else. And when you are caring for someone in their most vulnerable moments, and if you can get to that place where you just recognize, you know what, this is hard, everything's swirling around me, but one-to-one, this is an amazing experience. I think that's where that caregiver's gain comes through. So as academics, they haven't done a good job promoting this, but I told them I will tell everybody I know about the caregiver's gain, because I think if we know it as we go through it, it might just give us that much more perspective. The other thing I learned, again, in the contextual side, is that none of us will be spared caregiving at some level. So Rosalind Carter, our former First Lady, has a famous quote that there are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who will be caregivers, those who are caregivers, or those who will need caregivers. So the other thing that we experience in this is that many of us will go through caregiving many times. So it's not a sort of grit your teeth and get through it. It's a process that hopefully we can learn to live through. So let me talk about what I learned on that end. What are some of the things that we can do to achieve the caregiver's gain? And the book that I wrote is broken up into 10 chapters, and there are 10 recommendations for achieving that caregiver's gain. I'll just go through a few of them. But the first one is accepting our role as caregivers. I don't know if anyone else struggled with that, but that was huge for me. I'm the youngest of 3 daughters. I was not supposed to be the one. I'm the youngest. It's supposed to be the oldest. Everybody knows it's the oldest daughter. It wasn't supposed to be me. I'm not very compassionate. I was probably the busiest, but there's always one. It's a very common phrase in caregiving that there's always one sibling or person who seems to step up, and for whatever reason that was me. But I resisted it, and I whined about it, and I used all of my energy being mad about it, until one day that summer I've moved my mom now into assisted living from Falmouth up to Dedham, and I have a meeting with a nurse, a hospice nurse, to see if it's time to start hospice. And I remember showing up at the assisted living facility in a really bad mood, stressed, whiny, victim-y, really cranky that day. And the hospice nurse walks in, and she's very large and in charge, and she was prescient because this was pre-COVID, but she came in with rolls of paper towels, and she put them down before she sat down, and she put them down on the ground before she put her bag down. She wasn't going to get any germs, and she just immediately started to tell me how things were going to be. And in explaining to me how things were going to be and what was going to happen for my mother, I realized she assumed that I was there 24/7, that I had nowhere else to be. So I said, I need to see you in the hall. So we stepped out into the hall, and they had little seating areas, and I said, look, I said, I don't like that you assume that I don't have a job, that I don't have a family, that I'm here 24/7, that I don't have anything else to do, and I don't like you. And I'm actually really not that blunt normally, but I was just so spent. And then I just burst into tears. And she pulled her chair closer and leaned in, which now I know means compassionate conversation is coming, right? The chair pull and the lean in. And she said, look, I get it. I'm a single mom of 2 teenage girls. She said, let's come up with a new plan. And she said, oh, and I explained my dad was in the memory care facility in the same building. I said, you know, I've got a dad I need to care for. She said, your dad, we're not going to worry about him. He is being handled by professionals right now. I'm an expert hospice nurse. We're looking at months. So you're going to focus on your mother. You're going to worry about your father later, but he's in good hands. And she said, your family? She said, you're not going to worry about them either. I'm not going to worry about my kids. I haven't seen my kids. I haven't been home. She said, you don't need to be home for dinner. You need to be here. And by showing up here, you're showing them what unconditional love looks like. That always grabs me. I can't tell that story without getting choked up because it was such a powerful message, and she was right. And then she said, but your job, you can't lose that. So we're going to come up with a new plan. And she went back and she got into the room and she got on the phone and she came up with a whole new plan of how we'd administer the medications, et cetera, et cetera. And it was, I got home from that visit. I remember sitting down on my couch and thinking, you know what, Liz? Just do it. Stop fighting it. There's no way around this. You can't go under it. You can't go through it. And I bastardized a Robert Frost poem, you know, the only way through is through. Or I think it was Winston Churchill, right? If you're going through hell, keep going. And I just decided in that moment, just accept it. This is an energy game, and you're using all of your energy whining about it. You need to put your energy towards figuring this out. And then I found research in writing the book that actually caregivers who approach caregiving with sort of an acceptance role, who say, I am choosing to do this, have a much better experience than those who go through feeling like they have no choice in doing it. So I think if you're in that place, if you can say to yourself, you know, I choose to do this. And people will say to me, you think I chose this, Liz? My life is hell, their life is hell. Of course we don't choose the circumstances, but we do choose to show up. And I think we need to give ourselves credit for showing up. And it makes the experience just that much better. Another chapter in the book is called Absolve. So the dirty little secret about family caregivers is the word family, right? Families, they're not easy. They're fraught, right? Family dynamics and relationships. And so I always tell people, prepare to dust off the dysfunction. There's nothing like caregiving with your siblings or for your parents that doesn't make you feel like, you know, your 7-year-old, she's looking at me, mom, kind of self, right? All the stuff comes up. No time for the stuff. Put the stuff aside. I always say to people, because siblings is usually the first question I get when I give a talk like this, what about the siblings? They don't help. Caregiving is no time for magical thinking. If you have a brother who doesn't call, a sister who second guesses you, a parent who's critical of everything you do, forget about it. Put it in a box, make a list, save it for post-caregiving, but they are not going to change, and you don't have time in the midst of your caregiving to try to get them to change. So, you know, I'm the hero of this book, and the sisters, because I wrote it, right? But my other 2 sisters are beautiful writers, and if they had written the book first, I would have been the sister who was a steamroller, who was a pain in the ass, who told everybody what to do. But I wrote the book, so I look like the one who was organized and, you know, coordinated. But when we finally all got, the 3 sisters, we got to a place where we all have strengths. I'm logistics. I can get stuff done. I can talk to doctors. I can advocate. I had a to-do list of 196 items, and I could call Verizon and move my mother and see the doctor and do all that stuff. My older sister is slower. She moves at a different pace than the rest of us. She was long-term research. Look into funeral planning, look into, you know, legal planning, do long-term research. And my sister, who's out of state, could talk till your ears fall off and her bleeding. You call mom and dad every night, and you tell us if you hear something that we need to know. And so we all found our own skill set, and we all worked within our own skill set. I said there's always one, it's a common phrase, and there usually is one who's in charge among the siblings. And I say, if that's you, adopt a high input, low democracy approach to things. Because your parents chose you as the power of attorney or the healthcare proxy, or you stepped up because you have the skill set, so own it. It's just easier to get stuff done that way. Take the input, hear what other people have to say, but ultimately You're the decision maker. There was a night towards the end, long after my mom had passed away, toward the end of my dad's life, he had to go to the emergency room. And I remember it was about 11:30 at night. And I sent a text to my sisters, because we had a no hospital policy, but something couldn't be avoided. And I definitely had a no surgery policy for him at that point. He was 86, he had dementia, he had heart disease. What was I going to cut him for? But I had a surgeon in front of me at 11:30 at night, like, we got to cut, what's wrong with you, And so I texted my sisters, and I said, here's what's happening, here's what I'm thinking, what do you think? And a text comes back, and it's addressed to the other sister. And she says, here's the part where Liz asks us for our advice, and then tells us we're completely wrong. And I started to laugh, because that's exactly what I was planning to do. High input, I want to hear what you have to say. Low democracy, I'm in charge. But we got to this place where I wanted to hear what they had to say, and I wanted to keep them included, but I was the boss. So, and I think some people are hesitant to take that role, but you got that role for a reason. Another strategy is prioritizing. So one of the things I talk to the members of Working Daughter about is thinking about your life after caregiving. And people get really uncomfortable with that too. It feels kind of guilt-ridden, right? You want me to think about, oh, when they're gone, what am I gonna do? And then you're sad because, you're kind of maybe looking forward to a Saturday to yourself where you don't have 27 errands and responsibilities, but you know what that means. And you're sad about that and you feel guilty about that. But I find thinking about our life after caregiving to be a really powerful framework for getting through caregiving. So, and this is sort of what came up with that nurse, Bev, that day, is, I didn't want to get to the other side of caregiving and need a caregiver, but I could feel the stress of caregiving, and I could see it on my tooth, right? But I could feel the stress of caregiving. So, and I was living off of coffee in the morning, then I'd switch to Diet Coke, then I'd eat Twizzlers because something about the chewing and the sugar kind of made me feel better. And then I would get home and I'd be so amped up on sugar and caffeine, I'd have a glass of wine. Not really the picture of health, right? So I thought, if you don't get your act together, girl, you're gonna need a caregiver. So I wanted to have some level of health. So I started to drink a lot of water during the day and bring my sneakers with me to hospitals. So if someone was sleeping, I could go outside and go for a walk. I knew I needed to stay employed. I didn't want to be working at that point. I had to be working. So what did I have to do at work so that I wouldn't lose my job? I knew that I didn't want my marriage to fall apart, but the stress and the bickering, so looking through what are the most important areas of your life, relationships, health, finances, work, whatever they might be, and thinking about what you want in place, because caregiving sometimes can last a really, really long time, but it's never forever. So that you're going to have something to step into. And it becomes a really powerful lens too for making decisions. Do I stay at work or do I rush to the hospital? Well, how is this going to matter now, in 5 hours, in 5 months, in 5 years? So I feel like if we can put our life after caregiving plans in place as we're going through caregiving, because that's part of the challenge, is that as a caregiver, you're trying to figure out how to manage 2 lives. Theirs and yours matters just as much. And does it make any sense for your life to go to hell because you don't want someone else's life to fall apart? It's a balancing act. So I find prioritizing your post-caregiving thoughts to be a pretty powerful thing. Then from a purely practical standpoint is managing around 3 key areas: medical, legal, and living. I find though if people can get organized around those 3 topics, they're way ahead of the game than so many other people. My poor mom, one Thanksgiving, we had her over for Thanksgiving dinner, and after dessert, she's like, Elizabeth, I want to talk about, my will and my burial plot. And I'm, oh my God, Mom, you're gonna ruin Thanksgiving. And what a fool I was. What a gift that was. But at the time, I just didn't want to hear it. I had no idea what was coming. If you can have those conversations, it is gold, right? To understand what people's priorities and goals are later in life. And that's how I tell people to phrase it, not like what I used to do. You can't drive anymore, right, old guy? But it's a much better approach to, what are your goals for this next phase of your life? Oh, you want to stay in your home. Okay, well, you're willing to have a home health aide? Can we install grab bars? Are you willing to take the ride, as opposed to you can't, you shouldn't, you won't? And so really talking to your parents if you can. And if you haven't been able to talk to your parents, then I tell people, trust that you know them and you know what their wishes would have been and how they lived their life. But we have a checklist. It's in the book, and it's also on the Working Daughter site around the medical information that you need. Insurance cards, front and back. You want to know if you have which parts of Medicare you want to have, A, B, C, and D. Understanding what medications they take, who their doctors are, do they see specialists. If you can get organized around that area, you can get organized on the legal front around just having power of attorney and healthcare proxy. Huge, way ahead of the game. And then the living piece, I encourage people to think about that early if they can. Because I think one of the things that happens in this country is we don't talk about caregiving enough. We get to the point that maybe people can't function as well at home on their own. And we have no idea that assisted living is private pay and $6,000 to $8,000 a month. That nursing homes are different than assisted living, that independent, so we have no idea, and we show up and nobody's prepared for this financially, emotionally, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a checklist in here, and as I said, on workingdaughter.com. But if you can start to think through and understand what the options are for living. Aging at home is a huge trend right now. There's a real push for it, and I understand why, but especially coming from the healthcare companies and the insurance companies, because it's less expensive, right, than aging in an institution. But that means a family caregiver is going to be filling in the gaps. So really thinking through medical, legal, and housing, I think are the most practical thing that I'll say to you today. If you're working, thinking about what flexibility means, it's the number one request from family caregivers to employers, which makes perfect sense. But flexibility requires flexibility, right? So what are you going to do on your end so that your employer is hopefully going to be more flexible towards you? So this is a time in your career to keep your house in order. I remember I was here and I was really bad about turning in expense reports. And I had a good relationship with the office manager, but she called me and she's like, I can't cover for you anymore. If I don't have those expense reports in 2 days, I'm gonna have to tell the boss, you have not turned in an expense report in like 4 months. I was here, my receipts were in Dedham, and I had to wait till my mom fell asleep, so I felt safe to leave, drive home, gather them all up, come back, find a Kinko's or a FedEx or something. It was the last thing, but it was because I hadn't been living at work like a caregiver. Like I might get a call at any time. So CCing coworkers so people know what's going on, not saving things to the hard drive, save them to the G drive or the server. Make it easy for your coworkers to cover for you if you expect that you might get the call. And if you have relatives over the age of 65, expect you might get a call. I just think it's an important way for us to live. And I tell managers to adopt a don't ask, don't tell policy. So as opposed to, well, Sue, why do you want to leave next Friday at 3? Just, so you want to leave next Friday at 3? Great. I don't want to know why, because I never want to be in a situation to say your vet appointment is more important than your mother's doctor's appointment, which is more important than you picking the kids up off the bus. So training the workplace to say, I'm leaving, here's how things are covered, here's where things stand, here's when I'll be back, and here's how you can reach me, versus getting into people's personal stuff, because we all have personal stuff, all of us. And then we talked about this a little bit at a couple of minutes ago, but I think the 7 most annoying words you can say to a caregiver is, you need to take care of yourself. We know that. What we don't know is how. But one of the chapters is called Renew, and it's about self-care. And there are, I think, 50 to 100 suggestions, everything from like singing Barbra Streisand at the top of your lungs in your shower, in the car or the shower, just gardening, whatever it might be. But I'm not going to stand up here and tell you to get a massage, go to the gym, or get a manicure, although those are all nice. What I've found the most practical self-care advice is mindset and what we say to ourselves. So I think you might be the only one I need to explain this to, but do you remember a 45 record? Have you seen a 45? Yeah. So remember records used to come out in singles, and there was an A side and a B side. And so I always encourage people, there's always a B side, and we're always telling ourselves a story or singing a song, right? My song originally was, I'm the youngest, I'm the busiest, it shouldn't be me, where are my sisters, blah, 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 blah. And I knew that that was eating me alive, and also wasn't really fair or true. So what could my B side be? What could the other side of that song be? And it was, you got this, you can do this. That's why you're the one, because you're really good at this. And it was a little self-centered, but as caregivers, we don't get a lot of positive feedback, right? We are just doing this without any return. And so if I would give every family caregiver a little mirror, and I would say every night before you go to bed, you just look in that mirror and you say, I am amazing, because you are amazing. And I have proof. So part of the reason I like the post-caregiving plan, I forgot to mention this, is because we can't come at this whole caregiving and managing our own life experience from a time management perspective. You know that phrase that we all have the same 24 hours as Beyonce? Well, I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean. We're all supposed to look like her or something. I don't know. But we don't, actually. So I did research, and there's something that the US Census Bureau puts out called the American Time Use Survey. They put it out quarterly, I believe. And they look at what the average American spends on everything from commuting, showering, changing diapers, cleaning the house, every task that people do. And so I looked at the average family caregiver, a woman in her 40s or 50s, who's living in the sandwich, and I added up everything she has to do in a day, from taking care of herself, going to work, taking care of her kids, and taking care of her parents, 26.7 hours. So there really isn't enough time. And so many family caregivers are going to bed at night feeling like failures, like I didn't get it all done, because it's physically and mathematically impossible. So I just encourage you to think about what you're saying to yourself, as opposed to, I didn't get it done, I'm failing at this. But if we can really, I think that's the most important self-care we can do, is flip the script that we're telling ourselves. And in doing my goofy research, I realized that a lot of songs that are hits actually started on the B-side. So the B-side can be the much better top hit that you're singing to yourself anyway. So those are just a few of the strategies that I learned. I'll stop for a minute. Thank you for talking about my favorite topics: death, depends, dying, dementia. How fun is that on a Saturday, on a beach day? And see if you have any thoughts or questions. Yeah.
You mentioned the financial blow of assisted living. I wonder, if I might pry, did you have long-term care insurance?
No, we did not. That was a huge stressor, was not knowing both what my parents could afford and never really sitting down with my husband to talk about if we needed to do anything, would we have time? Because they, I think, both got diagnosed on the same day, and it was just chaos and just go, go, go. Never really had time for that conversation. And so it was scary. I was signing leases, I was leaving money on the table, I was hiring an elder law attorney, and never really knowing, is this going to work out? And it did. Sadly, my dad, at one point, as his dementia, I mentioned he started in memory care, and then it turns out as the Haldol that they had given him at Falmouth Hospital cleared his system, his dementia symptoms got very much lighter, lessened, less severe. And I was able to advocate to move him into assisted living for several years, and assisted living is a little cheaper than memory care too, which was nice. But he also thrived for a long time. And then sadly, when his dementia symptoms really kicked in, then he had to go to a nursing home because he couldn't really make it in assisted living or memory care. And then, poor guy, every time I thought we were going to run out of money, he was hospitalized, and then that kicked in like 3 months of Medicaid, and so stunk for him, but he kind of lived the same length of time as his checkbook. But it was really stressful. Yeah.
That long-term healthcare is great, but I know people that have put their family into assisted living, and it doesn't cover every year.
Yeah.
It covers a finite period, right?
It'll cover a year or two, and then it takes a break a year, and then it covers
That's
them.
it.
Yeah.
I paid that for my mom, so.
Yeah. Every time I do one of these talks, I hear stories about how difficult it is to enact the long-term care insurance. I'm not saying, I don't think it's a bad thing to do. I think it's a smart thing we should all be thinking about, but it can be challenging to get it to work. Yeah.
I was a caregiver for my husband who had Alzheimer's. He had early onset, and we went to a long-term, an eldercare senior attorney company, and they were able to get him onto Medicaid. He had to do a lot of legal work to do that, but we were able to do that, and it covered his nursing home, the memory care nursing home.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. So I love going to thrift stores. I love to hunt and find the bargain. And I think this is related. I once found a brand new pair of knee-high Prada boots, so probably like an $800 pair of boots, brand new, in St. Vincent de Paul's for $7. $7. When my parents got sick, I hired an elder law attorney, not a family trust or family estate, elder law expert. I was worried about paying him because I was just writing checks at that point. It was such good money. I always tell him he was a better value than the $7 Italian designer boots. That's how I think they are the best money you can spend. Yeah. And he helped me with accessing veterans benefits. If any of you have tried to do that, the forms are just so overwhelming, and he just made all that happen. So it's the best money you can spend.
So I'm in the situation now where my daughters are the working daughters, and I'm trying to set myself up for that next stage so they don't have this disaster on their hands. And that's why I'm here, because I wanted to hear what you had to say. And I have done a lot of what you said, and I've tried to take care of everything because they have families, they have lives, they're working.
Yeah.
They have husbands who work and who are demanding, and I'm trying to make life as easy for them as possible.
Yeah.
But they have been most cooperative too. Their statement to me always is, you took care of us for all these years, now it's our turn to take care of you. And they help me whenever I ask them, and they say, whatever you need, we'll be there for you. So, I'm lucky to have that, but I've set a lot of things up in motion starting years ago.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, it's such a gift, right?
Yeah.
It's such a gift. And if we can have these conversations, and my mother tried to have a conversation with me and I wasn't ready, and then later I was trying to have the conversations with them, and I tell
It's too
people
late.
it's not just too late, but it's also not a one and done conversation, right? It's like you never go into your boss and say, I want a raise, and the boss says okay, and you're done. It's a negotiation, right? It's an ongoing conversation. So I think you bring it up, whether it's parent to adult child or adult child to parent, and you take it as far as you can, and then you back up when people get uncomfortable, and you keep at it, and you keep talking about it, and you have these conversations. And I think they probably understand what you value, and you've done the work. And I hear that all the time now from people in the Facebook group. I will never put my children through this. Well, someone's going to have to take care of our rapidly aging society, and it's falling to families. So how can we set ourselves up? So everything that I talked about, knowing who the doctors are, passwords, right? And also just what you value is only going to help your kids. Yeah, because that's the other thing. I think as people age, sometimes their worlds get smaller, and we want to, why don't they get that I have a million other things to do? Because they don't have other things going on. Their worlds are getting smaller and smaller. But I think, for the most part, our parents still want to be parents all the way up to the end. So as much as we can do to manage our own affairs so that our adult children, can, and I hear that too all the time, I just want to be a daughter again, but I have to be a caregiver. And how do you find that time to be in that relationship? A lot of people, talk about caregiving as a role reversal and parenting, parenting our parents. I don't actually subscribe to that, and you and I were talking a little bit about this before we started. I think I think we haven't talked about this that much. We don't really have the words for it, right? So, but if we think about it, when we're children, we have that child-adult relationship. And then if you're lucky, because not every family can make the switch, but then if you're lucky, you have an adult-adult relationship, and you don't stay infantile, what's the word? Your parents don't still keep thinking of you as a child, and you don't still act like a child. You're like, oh, I like having adult children. This is a nice relationship. Well, there's a third level, right? And that's older adult and adult child. And maybe we shouldn't just flip to, oh, it's parenting all over again, because it's not. We're talking about people who've lived long lives, who have life experiences that we should value and respect. And if there's no cognitive decline, then their autonomy really, really matters. I think as children, we go right to safety. Safety, I've got to lock them down. I've got to put them in bubble wrap and keep them safe. And part of that, if we really examine it, is because it's going to make our lives easier. If my mother didn't fall, I wouldn't be rushing down here to the ER. But if my mother decides, my dad, if he wants to clean the gutters, he gets to clean the gutters. And then, when I said in that story up front that I read, I was like, but if you fall, it becomes my problem. Well, not necessarily. I would have made it my problem because I loved him, but I did have a choice, right? And so that, I think, is a really important part of this too, is our parents make choices, again, assuming no cognitive decline. It doesn't mean we jump or say how high. We get to choose how we respond to that. It's not easy, but we do get to set those boundaries. Like, you want to live at home? That doesn't mean I'm going to be the only person getting your groceries, right? There are other options, and you have to understand the consequences of your choice. I may decide I want to do everything for you, because that's the kind of daughter I am, but I don't have to be that kind of daughter. I think that's powerful.
There are many options in Falmouth. There's a wonderful program called Neighborhood Falmouth. I'm one of the volunteers, and they put requests on for everything. Take my barrels out, take me shopping, take me to the doctors, take me to the senior center so I can do line dancing. There are many, and that's not the only one, but there are many choices you have in Falmouth.
That's great.
They've really done a wonderful job taking care of their seniors.
That's great. Sue?
I just wanted to say, it's not really a question, but if you do have to put your parents in a facility, either long or short term, you really have to do your due diligence, because especially in this day and age, places are so shorthanded, and even if they mean well, you just really have to keep on top of a lot of things, and that in itself becomes really time-consuming.
It's so true. And so if you join the private Facebook group, there's just one screening question that I ask people to answer, because I don't want vendors coming in and trying to sell to people. And are you caring for an aging or ill family member or parent? And sometimes people write, no, they're in assisted living. And I don't think caregiving is it's the physical, it's the mental. Are you caring for someone? Do you care about them? Are you worried about them? And they may be in your home, they may be in their home, they may be, but yeah, you still have to be actively involved if you can. My strategy was always in the beginning, whether they were admitted to the hospital or moved to their different facilities, was to show up as much as possible in the early stages and meet every shift. Know everybody in every shift. And, come in, even though it's not my natural state, but come in friendly and smiley, right, and get to know everybody. And when, if or when I wasn't happy with something and I wanted to, correct a situation that I saw, then still, big smile but firm. Help me understand, and then, how can we rectify this? And if I wasn't getting any results, I would go to, if it were your father, what would you do? Give me some advice. Like, the nursing home lost my dad's dentures. Sorry, and I understand they take them out to eat, they get wrapped in a napkin, but just the complete dismissal. And here was a man who was disoriented, and if you don't have your stuff, right, it's not going to help. It's not therapeutic. So help me understand, and then finally, if your dad's dentures were missing, you work in this industry, what would you have me do? Give me some advice. And then I have a cousin who's a nurse who gave me great advice at one point that I always use, which was part of our jobs as advocates for our parents is to humanize them. And she said, use this language. This is my father. I've idolized him my whole life. He prefers to be called Joe. He has 3 grandchildren. They call him Papa. He used to work on the railroad, and really try to get these overworked, busy doctors, nurses, aides, and staff to see him not as the grumpy old man in room 3, but as someone that was loved by other people, and really try to humanize him. And that always stuck with me. So meet every shift, show up as much as possible. It's not always possible for us to be there, but as much as we can in the beginning, and get to know the staff. And I remember when my dad was in the nursing home, I committed to myself that I would visit him at least once a day. And sometimes I didn't get there till 7:30 or 8 at night, and sometimes I only stayed 5 minutes, but it was just something I wanted to do. So I walk in one night at 8, and there was this nurse. I had become friendly with Nurse Bill. And my dad was, his dementia in the end showed up as aggression sometimes. So he was a tough patient for the nursing staff. And I come through the locked doors, and Bill goes, "No, don't go in there, Liz, he's asleep." And I said, "I promise I won't wake him up, but I made a vow that I would visit him every day. I won't wake him up, Bill." So I sat by my dad's side. He didn't know I was there, but I knew he was there. And when I came out, I think I didn't leave for 2 more hours, because Bill then wanted to sit down and talk to somebody about how stressed he was about his aging parents that he was caring for. So these overworked, understaffed people are also working daughters and sons. It's tough. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Or?
I'll just say the greatest gift that I got from my mother was, as she put it, getting herself dead ready.
I love that.
She and my, yeah, all the time, let's get dead ready. And it was wonderful because I had a roadmap. I had a roadmap because she had been caregiver for her mother. And I am getting myself dead ready.
That's a gift.
It is a gift, and it was a gift because we talked about everything, and I was very lucky. My mom was 96 when she died, and sharper than I will ever be on my very best day. Her body didn't work, but her brain was.
Yeah.
And we were partners all the way through. My comment other than saying thanks to my grandma, my mother, and my daughter, is I'm a banker, and I cannot tell you the number of times I have had to talk to our customers who come in, some of whom I've known for years and years, talk to their children when there's been an issue, and if they have not gotten themselves dead ready, it really makes things so difficult because, like I say, in my role as a banker, there's so many things I can't do or can't say unless the proper legal forms or legal abilities are there. And that is very, very stressful for people I've known for years, for their children, and also for me.
I was a banker,
because you'll want to help, and you can't. So if I leave anybody with anything, it's like, get dead ready.
So like co-signing on accounts, power of attorney.
Co-signing, power of attorney, putting a trust in place, even putting a, doesn't even have to be a formal trust. In Massachusetts, there's something called a Tottenham Trust, which is an unwritten trust, where all you have to do is come in and say, here's my account, I'm naming my child as a beneficiary, and then they have no standing until you pass away.
Right.
They come in, they hand you a death certificate, they go, we're sorry, here's a check.
Wow.
So it's not even anything that difficult, but it should be there, and it is just so helpful
Thank
for
you.
everybody involved.
I think a will is very important if you can make all of that happen from a family perspective.
Mm-hmm.
When my mom passed away, it wasn't a big deal. That will was standing. But I have a sibling, that sibling, who we all know in the end is going to create a painful experience unless everything is protected.
Mm-hmm.
So hiring an estate attorney and making sure the will was in order, making sure the trust was in order, everything's in order, and she can't come and interfere with that part.
Yeah. So important because the paperwork post-death, I remember my mom passed away in October. March, I think I was going away with my kids and my husband and my cousins on a ski trip. My husband was like, what is with you? And I burst into tears. I'm like, I am as stressed now with all of the post paperwork and insurance forms and banking as I was when the tooth broke. Like there's a period in there that's just a lot of stuff, a lot of being on hold, like, those Verizon calls all over again. And there's also, I tell people, if there isn't a lot to work with and there aren't a lot of people that are involved, you also can take your time. You don't have to kill yourselves getting all that in order if you don't need to get that in order too. So pace yourself. But thank you for that. It's really helpful. And have you heard of the book Swedish Death Cleaning?
I gave it to her.
Sweet. There's a book, and there's a thing, and someone wrote a book about it. It's called Swedish Death Cleaning. And so, you probably are more familiar with it than me. Cleaning. So, there's that saying, you spend the first 50 years of your life acquiring stuff, and you spend the next 50 trying to get rid of it. And so I guess the concept is that around the age of 50, people start cleaning out their stuff, because if you don't, someone else is going to have to, right?
When my mom passed away, we used that as part of his grieving process. He cleaned up all the excess stuff in the house, and it was really therapeutic for him at that point.
And some people, it's too painful when someone passes away. So the more you do when they're alive and it's not as emotionally charged can be helpful too. Yeah.
There's actually quite a number of books that claim to be Swedish death cleaning. Is yours Master the Art of Swedish Death Cleaning, or
I
no?
don't remember.
Just any old book on Swedish
a
death
big
cleaning?
Yeah, I mean, that was the exact title. The title was Swedish Death. I don't remember what the subtitle was.
Because there's really a selection of Swedish death cleaning books to pick from.
There are now,
There was probably the original,
a more
yeah.
famous one to
Yeah.
begin with.
It was a couple, it was
Yeah.
After Marie Kondo got
Yeah,
big, so
yeah.
it was sort of related to that.
Yeah.
5 years, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
That was so, sorry.
That was subtle.
I work as a nurse for Cape Cod Healthcare, and they have a free program, and it's called the Dementia and Alzheimer Caregiver Support Program for families. And you can get a 90-minute free consultation with one of 3 nurses, and we go through the legal and medical.
Wow, that's great.
Safety. I didn't catch what you said about a trust in Massachusetts. What was the name?
It's called the Totten Trust, Totten.
Totten.
Totten Trust.
Totten Trust.
In Massachusetts and also New Hampshire.
Okay.
You can, because it's unwritten, you can have up to 4 beneficiaries on it. A lot of people will use it just because beneficiaries get FDIC coverage too. So I mean, there's different reasons to have it. But just to use myself as an example, I was my mom's caregiver and did everything for her. We had a Totten Trust for her account that was the one that I had to pay the caregiver bills out of. And when she finally passed away, my sister, my brother, and I were beneficiaries. It's just literally a question of handing the bank a death certificate. They cut a check literally the same day.
What is the difference with that versus the elder attorney that I saw for my mom just suggested that she put my name on everything?
There's a
What's the
difference between being a joint owner on an account and being a beneficiary. So in other words, with a joint account, each person, sounds crazy, owns it 100%. So and you can use it for different things. And again, I'll use myself as an example. My mom's checking account, I was joint with her, so I could use it for when I needed to go to CVS to pick up her meds or do things like that. But her large account, the one that I pay the nursing home bills out of and the at-home caregiver bills out of, I didn't want to be a joint owner on that because my brother and sister also needed to be involved. So I used my power of attorney there. Well, as you know, power of attorney ceases on death. So at that point, then that account belonged to the 3 of us. I continued to use the joint account. Literally, I paid for her funeral out of it because at that point it belonged to me, essentially, and I just kept going with it to do what I needed to do. So there's a reason to be a joint owner. There's a reason to just use power of attorney, knowing that it ceases on death. And there's a reason to simply be a beneficiary. Best of all, quite honestly, in my opinion, is get a trust, a revocable trust, because that.
You say revocable or irrevocable?
Well, there's 2 different reasons to do it, but I would say revocable. It becomes irrevocable after the donor passes away, but up until that happens, it can be changed by the donor. So you can change beneficiaries, you can change trustees, you can change terms. You can do really anything you want. And from the bank's point of view, it's.
But what about, and the only question, and not to
No, this is really
bog
useful.
us down, but
This is
legal.
why we're here, all of this stuff.
The number one other than safety is the legal. Can they get at that asset if it's revocable, is what we're hearing, the nightmare. So they go into Harbor Point, okay? And then all of a sudden they are being told that long-term care insurance, whatever, is gone. So they can access, because there's no it's within that 5-year look back, they're able to access that asset because it's revocable.
Yeah.
So that's where, and probably every attorney you ask, you might get a different
It's true.
swing on it.
Yeah.
But, so that's where.
And I'm going to say exactly that again, what the bank was, you must consult your legal advice, and you must consult your tax advisor, because there are different reasons for ways of doing it. It depends if both spouses are alive, if one spouse is, if there's only one person left, whether the trust in fact does become irrevocable, who the trustees are, and there's so many moving parts.
And if
Really is
anything
something.
of all of this, like other than what you said about like Thanksgiving dinner and your mom, my mom wanted to pick out a casket. I'm making a turkey. I'm like, Mom, we're not talking caskets right now. But it made me chuckle. So the legal, it's so huge. Getting
Huge.
elder, I don't care what they cost you. They give you a 90-minute free consultation.
They do, yeah, and you can get a lot in
Do
that.
it. It's the worst thing you want to do, but just do it because,
Mm-hmm.
like you say, when you're getting that call in the middle of the night and you're making these decisions, you don't know where anything is, and it's just a nightmare. So,
Also shows you where they are financially,
Right,
because I never knew where they were. It wasn't my business.
right. But it becomes your business really fast, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
If you are the power of attorney and you're the healthcare proxy and, just getting all, everything involved and all that nightmare.
Yeah.
It's just, if you can do that before.
I tell people though, because I've been through it, obviously watching my mother go through it with my grandma and then doing it with my dad and my mom. It's good planning. It's nothing more than that. It's
But
just
it's
simply
an
good planning.
uncomfortable conversation,
Yeah.
for some families because that relative that does nothing down over the other side of the
Right,
world,
right.
all of a sudden wants, it's uncomfortable, but you're right, if you get it all down in writing and black and white,
Yeah,
then you
yeah.
can focus on the joy that you're trying to bring into the life at the end.
You don't have to worry.
Yeah,
about it.
yeah.
It's a roadmap.
Put all that
Yeah.
aside.
And,
There's a book that's titled, I know I have the title wrong, but let's not have this conversation, or let's have this conversation.
Let's have this conversation, I think.
And it's actually a graphic.
oh, it's Roz Chast.
Yes,
Yes, it's an
yes.
excellent book about
Excellent book.
aging
This
parents.
conversation.
And
Yes.
I don't think that's the exact name of it, but
Yeah,
it's
something-
Roz Chast,
Let's talk about something more pleasant.
Yeah,
yes, that's it.
that's
Let's
it.
talk about something, that's the title.
Something
Yeah, and I think she was like a cartoonist for the New
Yeah,
Yorker or
it's great.
something. It's fantastic,
Yeah,
yeah.
great book.
Very funny, but spot
Yeah.
on, yeah. I mean, you mentioned that, and Sue, this is why I'm so grateful to the library and these conversations and that we're all having this. You mentioned that, you witnessed caregiving. I think for a lot of us, we didn't witness it. And so it's not a conversation that we've been comfortable. I mean, the one thing every single one of us has in common is that we'll die. That's like the one main thing that we all have in common. But as a culture, we're not comfortable talking about it. I didn't see caregiving growing up, so I didn't prepare for it. And it wasn't because my parents wouldn't have helped their parents. It was because all 4 grandparents died quickly from a cardiac event. My parents had the same cardiac health issues, but my dad's first heart attack was at 60 and he lived to 91 because we're living longer due to science and medicine. And so I never witnessed what it took to care for an aging parents because my parents never had the opportunity really to care for aging parents, right? So, and you mentioned your children, wanting to do for you what you did for them, and I think you raised them well, you did something right, and we're all lucky if we can be in that situation. One of the things, we never use the term loved one in the working daughter community because not everyone's caring for someone they loved, right? But what was the other thing I was going to say about that? Oh, I think one of the things that makes elder care so different from parenting, and we tend to conflate them, and there are some commonalities, of course, but with parenting, oftentimes, not everybody, of course, but especially professional working people, they think about having children and they plan for it, right? And they think about, what is this going to do to my, my job, my relationship, my body, right? My finances. They make space in their lives and their homes, and they think about the impact. But with elder care, it just happens, right? And so these conversations, I think, are so important to think about. I played with baby dolls growing up. I love playing with baby dolls. And so I always imagined what it was like. I never played with elderly dolls. Never thought I would be the one doing these things, right? I had no training, no experience. And so I love this conversation that you're all having. And there's the other book I would recommend is Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. Is also a really heavy read, but a fantastic book. And he's a New York Times bestseller, but also a surgeon at, I think, the Brigham in Boston. And it's all about the fact that we've got this aging society and we haven't thought about it and what are the implications. Excellent, excellent book.
It's huge implications.
Massive, massive, yeah. Yeah, so another book that I love is, it's called but not, I mean, it's not as, practical to the adult child caregiver, but it's called The Longevity Economy, and it's written by someone who works at MIT, Dr. Joseph Coughlin. And in it, one of the things that really struck me in his book is he talks about what I just said, that people are living longer. And as we're living longer, we're more likely to live with chronic illnesses. And so he said, what we're trying to figure out in real time is how do you give somebody quality of life for 100 years, for 96 years? Not, at least two of my grandparents were 80 when they passed away. My dad lived to 91. So how do you give somebody quality of life across all areas of their life? And oftentimes that's all falling on the adult daughter or son to be the social, the medical, the transportation, the food. And again, back to Beyonce, that takes more than 24 hours a day. It's 27.6 to be exact.
What do you consider quality of life?
Well, what do they consider quality of life? Yeah.
I sometimes look at my dad and I oh my God, there was just a year ago so much more to your quality of life, and now it just gets smaller and smaller.
Yeah,
and smaller.
yeah. Well, and our definitions of it change, I'm sure, Yeah.
Is that what they call the circle of life?
I think so. I call it the season I'm in right now, personally.
Yeah. Yep. All right, so now you all have your reading list. Swedish death cleaning. I'd start with that one. Get rid of your stuff.
I love getting rid of stuff. If anybody needs me
Oh
else,
my God.
I'm good at it too.
Me too.
That's what I'm in the process of doing in my house, cleaning it out. It's a job.
Do you have, you have plenty of advice for people in this situation as individuals. You must have at certain points thought on a systems level. Does the system as it exists in the United States for long-term and assisted living and acute care, does it work? Does it need tinkering?
Oh, yeah.
Not on the systems level?
Oh, yeah, and you use the word cute. I was going to say, I'm acutely aware that I spend my time telling individuals how to make a really, really difficult situation a little bit better. And that bothers me because it shouldn't fall on all of us, right? This is, back to 10,000 people turning 65, $600 billion of unpaid care. One of the areas that Working Daughter focuses on quite a bit is companies. So, companies are a huge lever for improving or changing or not improving people's lives, right? Depending how you look at it. It had the potential, right? And family caregivers are the fastest growing employee group. So too many companies, when they talk about work life, are only talking about workers who are parents. And I work really hard to try to get companies to remember there are workers with parents as well. And so what benefits do you need to provide them, and how do you set up flexibility, and how do we keep caregivers in the workplace? Because when they leave the workplace, as I said, 60% of women leave or take a pay cut or whatever, then it's not just that they're not getting their paycheck, but they're not putting into retirement, and women tend to live longer, and who's get blah, right? So yeah, the systems, and then, monitoring what's some of the legislation that's happening around paid family caregivers and paid leave. Absolutely. Yeah, that's where, that's who I want to be listening. Hello, right? That's where the real change has to happen. In the meantime, it falls to all of us. And so what can we do to make our lives a little bit better? But
It's more than tinkering.
yeah. And, I think if you start with what we pay our paid caregivers, so many of them don't have the same workplace protections as just, the average worker. And so, and there's a shortage, especially after COVID. Yeah. So yes. Where's my soapbox? And I think if family care, I always say Working Daughters would be the most powerful advocate group if they weren't just so damn busy, right? So after their caregiving experience, we try to get them engaged.
People say to me sometimes, how come your siblings don't help? It's hard to explain to somebody that's not going through it why they don't help. They're doing the best they can, too.
Right. And that's where I'm like,
Denial too, like they just want to deny, like that works great. Like a lot of families are having a hard time
yeah,
accepting the role that their parents are in,
yeah.
so they kind of back off a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I always learn, don't judge, because mom not know who he is sometimes. He just can't feel.
Right, yeah.
I'm like, I'm just grateful that she, lets me in her house sometimes, right? So it's all perspective.
Yeah, this is not for like the
I
weak.
can judge him because
Yeah.
I know he's hurting as well.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
But it's hard not to because
Yeah,
I got my brother doing grocery shopping. I'm a happy.
yeah, yeah. Right, and that's where the like no time for magical thinking. Like
Right.
my brother is only going to be able to do the grocery shopping. This brother cannot handle it. It hurts him too much. So just keep going. Yeah. Later, maybe you want to address it later. And I mean, who knows, right? Yeah.
I'll be right
But
back
yeah,
and let it go. Just
let it go. Yeah. May not be fair, but you have stuff to get done. Yeah.
life.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
This was a wonderful experience.
Well, thank you all for coming. Yeah, it's always great talk.
Thanks.